Hello, I'm Trevor Herman. I'm a counselor in Asheville, North Carolina. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I make these videos primarily for current and prospective clients to learn new skills, to practice skills we've tried in therapy, or to gain new information or refresh information about mental health and wellness and resilience. If you're not a client, not interested in being a client, please enjoy the videos as well. They can be helpful for just about anyone. If you are in a mental health emergency, please stop watching the video and call 911. Please don't try to contact me in the event of an emergency. I hope that you enjoy the videos, get something out of them, and if you want to subscribe to my channel, that's great. If you enjoy the video, please hit like, that's helpful to me, and enjoy. Welcome back. Today we're going to discuss my take on when it might be appropriate to add medications to your treatment. And I'll start by saying that I am not heavily for medications and I'm not heavily against them. I take a very case-by-case, let's weigh the pros and cons stance to medications. I've certainly seen medications play a part in saving people's lives, and so I wouldn't want to discount that because I've also seen medications have almost unbearable side effects for some folks as well. So as with most things in mental health, I think it's helpful to use an analogy to visualize what living with mental health symptoms could be like. And so my preferred analogy for this is to think of the symptoms you may be experiencing as a river. And rivers come in different shapes and sizes. And in this case, we'll think of your symptoms as a river that you need to cross multiple times a day in order to go about your daily business. As in, leaving the house to go to the grocery store involves crossing the river of your symptoms. And so, on the lower end of symptoms, we might visualize the river as relatively slow moving and wide and shallow, such that when you stand on the shore, you can see that there are rocks that you can, with some attention and focus, move from rock to rock and get across the river safely without even getting your feet wet. But it did take a little extra attention and focus, and it is more tiring than simply walking on a road. And so this kind of river is what I think of as mild symptoms. And so if the symptoms were anxiety symptoms, these might be the sort of symptoms that someone with generalized anxiety might experience. The idea of going to the store is uncomfortable, but by no means is this person avoiding going to the store out of the discomfort. They go ahead and they prepare themselves and they cross the river. And by the time they get to the store, they may be a little uncomfortable. They may notice their heartbeat is a little elevated. The breathing may be a little shallow, but they're by no means in a panic state. And they go about their business at the store. And by the time they get home, they've crossed the river and they feel safe again. And they've done what they need to do. They may notice that it takes a little bit of a toll on them, but again, they didn't avoid it. Okay, so these would be mild symptoms. And if someone came to me asking about a medication for these mild symptoms, I would encourage them to look elsewhere, to maybe consider 5 or 6 sessions of therapy to examine the current coping skills that you may have, to boost those current skills, and then maybe add in a couple new ones just to try them out and see if that helps. And oftentimes that will. Simply the act of going to a specialist, a therapist, and discussing it, that actually can help. So for those relatively mild symptoms, I personally wouldn't consider medications. And so if we visualize the river is now rising and becoming more swift and the rocks are a little further apart, now we're getting into more moderate symptoms. And if we go back to thinking of anxiety in relation to this river, now going to the store produces some delay. It takes more preparation to leave the house in order to be ready to cross that river of symptoms to get to the store. And when crossing the river, each leap from rock to rock really takes more effort and focus. I'm not doing it smoothly anymore. I'm really having to stop and pay attention to every rock and then make a deliberate leap to every other rock. And so this is pretty exhausting. This is really now taking a toll on me as I leap from rock to rock to rock. And by the time I cross the river, I may notice that I'm pretty tired. And that tiredness has its own side effects. I start to really dread crossing the river over and over and over again just to go about my daily business. And so that dread and that tiredness may start to invite the close cousin of anxiety, which is depression. And I may start to notice that I'm feeling down about myself because of the exhaustion of living with this dread of crossing my river over and over and over. So these are more moderate anxiety symptoms. And at this point, I do start to think about, let's add some medications to the existing counseling and the existing self-care and lifestyle changes in order to give you some space from your symptoms. In other words, to bring the water level back down enough that the rocks are more distinct, the rushing water is less intimidating, and you can cross the river back and forth with it being less exhausting. And that over time, by building up your coping skills in counseling, you're going to get to a place where maybe you could stop the medication in 6 months or a year with the help of your prescribing doctor, not just on your own, because that can have its own side effects that bring the river waters way up. So we want to, anytime we start or stop a medication, we really want to do that in consultation with a prescriber. And so those moderate symptoms, or that moderately fast-moving river where the crossing is pretty exhausting, that's when I start to talk to clients about a medication and the pros and cons of a medication. But only in the context of also going to therapy and also making lifestyle changes and diet changes and adding in exercise and things like yoga that we know at this point are some of the best treatments for anxiety and depression. And so now if we go back to our river, now the waters are really pretty high. And we can't even see the rocks anymore, and we're not sure how deep the water is at any point, and it's moving pretty fast. So to cross the river, you may stand on the bank for a while and really consider whether it's worth the effort or even if it's safe to cross the river. At this point, symptoms are getting pretty high. If we go back to the anxiety analogy, it may take hours to prepare to do something as commonplace as go to the store or to take the kids to a soccer game where you're going to have to interact with other parents, or to go to the dentist, or just about anything outside of the bubble of your home. And so now the river is really intruding on your daily life. Crossing the river back and forth becomes such a chore, and you're so exhausted by the time you make a crossing that you really start to avoid it. And really commonly now, if depression wasn't a part of it before, depression is probably a part of it now, because the other parts of a person's life aren't keeping up because of the avoidance of crossing the river of the symptoms. You know, if it takes hours to prepare to go to the store, it's really hard to keep up with the other pieces of life, whether it's work or kid transportation or social events. Those things are really starting to fall at the wayside. So the crossing of this fast, higher river really becomes so intimidating that many things are let go. And oftentimes depression is really taking hold, and it's really hard to get out of bed, and thoughts of hopelessness are more common. And so at this point, I very much advocate for a client to explore medications and to go to a specialist to do that, a psychiatrist or a psychiatric PA or nurse practitioner, because at this point the symptoms are bordering on dangerous. The river is not just intimidating anymore. As that depression creeps in and as the hopelessness creeps in, then thoughts of suicide are probably not too far off. And so the rushing river is really causing someone's coping to collapse at this point. And so now we need to explore every option for treatment. We're doing therapy. We're examining lifestyle. We're trying to add in exercise. We're talking to a psychiatrist about medications. And if suicidal thoughts come in, then we're exploring the option of going inpatient, where obviously medications are a huge piece of treatment. And so it's also worth remembering that rivers, even for the same person, are quite changeable. Someone who's used to their river being wide and shallow and relatively slow moving with a visible path across may have a thunderstorm upriver, and all of a sudden their river isn't safe to cross anymore. So in a person's life, that could be a job loss is the thunderstorm, or a relationship rupture is the thunderstorm. And all of a sudden the river that was manageable becomes unmanageable. And so that person who was maintaining with just a healthy lifestyle and paying attention to their coping now finds that that's not enough. And so we need to really explore all the options in this case, because now the river isn't safe to cross, even if it used to be, and even if we expect that in a couple months it will be again. So in that situation, again, I may explore medications to get through that flood period of the river so that it becomes safe to cross back and forth and keep up with your life. And the reason I'm careful about medications is that the side effects can be notable. It's really a hard sell for someone who's experiencing depression to take a medication that causes them to gain 50 or 100 pounds. Because if I was already struggling with my self-esteem and I gain 100 pounds, now I'm really struggling with my self-esteem for the most part. And so if we can address the milder symptoms with therapy and healthy lifestyle changes, that is always going to be my vote. But when we start to get into a place where the river of symptoms is so overwhelming that coping is collapsing, normal activities are being avoided or stopped altogether, and then we get into a place of potential risk to self or others, then we really need to explore every option and be willing to jump into some medications to help bring the water level back down to where the therapy can do its job. And if the therapy does a good enough job over time, remove the medications, and the coping will keep up with maybe the slight rise of water that happens when the medications are gone. And so that's a brief analogy and explanation of how I think about adding medications into a treatment regimen. And I say it really deliberately that we're adding medications into existing treatment because I firmly believe that simply taking a medication to treat symptoms is doing you a disservice, that you're not building up the other coping and resiliency skills that are going to help you through future floods if you're relying only on the medication to manage the symptoms and keep the water level low. So that's my take on medications in a nutshell. I hope that's helpful. Feel free to reach out to me via email if you have questions or concerns about what I've said today. Thank you.